the silent shift you never saw coming. Have you ever felt someone slipping away from you emotionally long before they ever said a single word about leaving? That quiet, invisible shift where the person you loved was still standing in front of you, still texting you back, still showing up on the surface, but something inside them had already walked out the door? If you've ever loved an avoidant, you know exactly what that feeling is. And if you're watching this right now, there's a very real chance you're trying to figure out whether the avoidant in your life is coming back, or whether they're already gone in a way you can't yet see. Because here's the truth nobody wants to tell you. Not every avoidant returns. Some of them do. Many of them do. But there is a specific moment, a silent shift inside their mind, where the door doesn't just close, it locks. And by the time you feel it, they've already been gone for weeks, maybe months, maybe longer than you'd like to admit. What makes this so painful, so confusing, so absolutely disorienting is that avoidants don't leave the way anxious partners leave. They don't slam doors. They don't send long paragraphs explaining their pain. They don't beg for closure or demand a final conversation. They disappear inside themselves first. And by the time their body finally follows, the emotional exit happened a long, long time ago. That's the part most people never understand. You keep waiting for them to come back to a version of the relationship that, in their mind, doesn't exist anymore. You keep replaying the last good memory, the last warm text, the last moment they looked at you like they saw a future. And you tell yourself, they'll remember, they'll miss me, they'll come back. But something inside you already knows. Something is different this time. Something feels final, in a way it never felt before. Here's what attachment research reveals about avoidants that will change the way you look at everything. Avoidants don't process endings the way secure people do. They don't sit with the grief. They don't cry it out. They don't have long conversations with friends analyzing every detail. Their nervous system is wired to do something very specific when emotional intimacy becomes too overwhelming, too painful, or too threatening. It deactivates. It shuts down the emotional bond piece by piece, quietly, almost surgically, until one day the connection that used to light them up simply doesn't register anymore. And the terrifying part is, they often don't even realize it's happening until it's already done. They wake up one morning and the feeling is gone. Not buried, not suppressed. Gone. Now here's the curiosity gap I want you to hold on to for the rest of this video, because everything I'm about to share with you is going to build on this one truth. There is a specific behavior an avoidant does right before they permanently close the door. Most people misread it. Most people think it's a phase. Most people think it means the avoidant is confused or scared or just needs space. And because they misread it, they wait. They hope. They give more. They chase softer. And by the time they realize what that behavior actually meant, the avoidant isn't coming back. Not this time. Not ever. And I'm going to walk you through exactly what that behavior is, why it happens, what it reveals about their internal worlds, and most importantly, what it means for you and your healing if you're recognizing it right now. But before we get there, I need you to understand something deeper about how avoidants actually experience love. Because if you don't understand this, everything else will sound like a contradiction. Avoidants don't stop loving people the way you might imagine. They don't wake up hating you. They don't erase the memories. They don't rewrite you into a villain overnight. What they do is something far more painful, far more confusing, and honestly, far more human than most people give them credit for. They protect themselves from the feeling of love itself, because for an avoidant, love was never safe. Somewhere in their earliest emotional wiring, love got tangled up with engulfment, with loss, with disappointment, with the terrifying feeling of needing someone who might not need them back the same way. And so their entire adult attachment system is built around one silent rule: never let anyone get close enough to hurt you like that again. So when you feel that shift in them, that quiet distance that doesn't quite make sense, that coldness that appears out of nowhere, that emotional flatness where warmth used to live, you're not imagining it. You're witnessing the beginning of a process that has been rehearsed inside them since childhood, and whether it ends in them coming back to you or walking away forever depends on one thing: whether they've crossed the invisible line, the point of no return, the silent shift where the door doesn't just close, it seals. And you deserve to know exactly what that looks like. Because once you see it, you'll finally be able to stop guessing, stop hoping against evidence, and start responding to what's actually happening, not what you wish was happening. The emotional detachment that signals the end. What if the person you're waiting for has already said goodbye to you inside their own mind, and you're the only one who doesn't know it yet? That's the quiet horror of loving an avoidant who has crossed into full emotional detachment. Because there's a version of avoidant withdrawal that is temporary, painful, exhausting, but ultimately reversible. And then there's a version that isn't. And the tragedy is, from the outside they can look almost identical for a while. Same short replies, same distance, same unreadable expression. But underneath, one is a wall built out of fear, and the other is a door that has already been permanently sealed. Understanding the difference between the two might be the single most important piece of psychological insight you ever gain about the person you love. Temporary avoidant withdrawal usually has a heartbeat underneath it. There's still tension in their silence. There's still guilt in their distance. There's still a low hum of anxiety when they think about you, even if they'd never admit it out loud. Their nervous system is dysregulated, overwhelmed, flooded, but it's still connected to yours in some invisible way. That's why avoidants in this stage often come back after weeks or months. Something reminds them, something softens them, something breaks through the fog, and suddenly the feelings they buried resurface with unexpected force. That's the version of avoidant withdrawal most people online talk about, because that's the version that gives hope. That's the version that fuels the reunion stories. But it's not the only version, and it's not the one this video is about. The version we're talking about is different. It's quieter. It's colder. It's what psychology calls full deactivation, and it's the stage where the emotional bond has been so thoroughly dismantled inside the avoidant's mind that there is no longer anything left to reactivate. Their body might still show up. Their words might still be polite. They might even sleep next to you, laugh with you, plan things with you. But something essential is missing. The internal thread that used to connect them to you has been cut, one strand at a time, over weeks or months of quiet processing you never got to witness. And when you finally realize the thread is gone, it feels like the ground disappears underneath you. Because you weren't part of the ending. The ending happened without you. This is what makes avoidant endings so devastating. Anxious partners rip the bandage off. They fight, they beg, they express. There's no ambiguity about where they stand emotionally, but avoidants grieve silently, invisibly, often while they're still in the relationship with you. They mourn the version of you they hoped you'd be. They mourn the connection they wanted but couldn't stay open to. They mourn the future they know they can't give you. And they do all of this alone, behind a face that still smiles at you across the dinner table. So by the time the relationship officially ends, the avoidant has already been on the other side of grief for a long time. They've already accepted it. They've already integrated it. They've already made peace with your absence while you were still present. That's why they can seem so shockingly calm when the breakup finally happens. It's not that they don't care. It's that they've already done the caring in private without you. And here's the part that hurts even more. This kind of emotional detachment doesn't announce itself. There's no dramatic moment, no big fight, no clear line in the sand. It's a slow, gradual dimming. It looks like slightly shorter texts over a period of weeks. It looks like a subtle drop in eye contact. It looks like them saying yes to plans but with a flatness in their voice. It looks like affection that used to feel effortless, suddenly requiring effort. It looks like them being physically present, but emotionally somewhere you can't reach. And because it happens so gradually, you keep adjusting. You keep telling yourself it's stress, it's work, it's their family, it's a phase. You keep giving the benefit of the doubt long past the point where the doubt has become the reality. What research on avoidant attachment reveals is that this process is not a choice they're making consciously to hurt you. It's a survival mechanism that has been running in the background of their nervous system since long before you ever met them. When intimacy reaches a certain threshold of intensity, when the relationship requires a level of vulnerability their inner world cannot tolerate, their psyche does something extraordinary and heartbreaking. It begins to pre-grieve the loss. It begins to prepare for the ending before the ending has even started. Because in the avoidance emotional logic, if they can feel the loss before it happens, they can control it. If they can numb themselves in advance, they can never be blindsided the way they were as a child. And once that pre-grieving process has fully run its course inside them, the door doesn't just close, it disappears entirely. There's no door to knock on anymore. The wall is smooth and cold and complete. This is why so many people who've loved avoidance describe the ending as feeling like they were talking to a stranger who happened to wear the face of the person they used to love. Because in a very real psychological sense they were. The person they fell for is still in there somewhere, but that person has been walled off, sealed away, quietly retired from the relationship in favor of a version that feels nothing, needs nothing, misses nothing. And when you're standing on the other side of that wall, trying to reach the person you know is in there, you have to make a decision that no one prepares you for. Do you keep knocking on a door that no longer exists? Or do you finally accept that some endings happen long before we're ready to see them? When an avoidant stops feeling the push-pull. Have you ever noticed how an avoidant can seem obsessed with you one moment and completely uninterested the next, and how that maddening rhythm somehow keeps you tied to them, even when everything inside you knows better? That's the push-pull cycle, and it's the invisible heartbeat of every avoidant relationship. It's the reason you can't seem to walk away, even when they've pulled back a dozen times. It's the reason their moments of warmth feel more intense than any warmth you've ever known. And most importantly, it's the reason the ending, when it truly comes, feels so unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. Because the clearest sign in avoidant is never coming back, isn't distance, it isn't silence, it isn't coldness, it's the sudden, eerie disappearance of the push-pull itself. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand what the push-pull actually is at a psychological level. It's not a game. It's not manipulation. It's not calculated behavior designed to keep you hooked. It's the internal war between two competing forces inside the avoidant nervous system. On one side, there's the deep human need for connection that every person is born with, no matter how thoroughly they've learned to suppress it. On the other side, there's the equally powerful conditioned fear that connection leads to engulfment, disappointment, and loss of self. These two forces don't take turns politely, they fight. And when the need for connection temporarily wins, the avoidant pulls you in. They reach out, they soften, they let you back into their inner world just enough for you to feel hope. And then the fear catches up, and they retreat with even more intensity than before, because now they have to overcorrect for the closeness they just allowed. If you've ever felt whiplash in a relationship, that's what you were feeling. Not chaos, not confusion, a nervous system at war with itself. And here's the crucial insight most people miss. As long as an avoidant is still in that push-pull cycle with you, there is still emotional charge in the connection. There is still something alive between you, however painful it might be. The fear itself is proof that there's still something worth fearing. The withdrawal itself is proof that there's still something worth withdrawing from. As exhausting as the cycle is, it's actually evidence that the avoidance heart is still engaged, still activated, still fighting the war it doesn't know how to end. But when that cycle goes quiet, when the pull stops happening, when even the push loses its intensity, that's when you have to pay attention, because that's when the war inside them has finally ended and not in the way you were hoping. An avoidant who's stopped feeling the push-pull isn't punishing you. They're not testing you. They're not playing hard to get. They've simply moved past the internal battle that used to keep them tied to you emotionally. Their nervous system has, in effect, filed your relationship away as something that no longer requires processing. And when that happens, something profoundly telling occurs in their behavior. They stop feeling guilty when they don't reply. They stop feeling anxious when they think about you. They stop feeling that low hum of longing that used to catch them off guard at 3 a.m. The emotional static that used to fill the space between you goes silent. And silence, in avoidant psychology, is far more final than distance ever was. Neuroscience has fascinating things to say about this process. When we form a deep emotional bond with someone, our brain literally builds neural pathways that light up in response to their presence, their name, their memory, their scent. For a secure person, these pathways fade slowly over time after a loss, allowing for a natural grieving process. But for an avoidant, especially a dismissive avoidant, the brain has learned to accelerate that fading through a process called emotional deactivation. Every time they consciously or unconsciously redirect their attention away from thoughts of you, every time they suppress a memory before it fully surfaces, every time they distract themselves from an emotional pang, they are literally weakening the neural pathways that connect them to you. Over weeks and months, those pathways don't just weaken, they atrophy, they stop firing, they stop existing as active circuits in their brain. And once the neural architecture of the bond has been dismantled, there is nothing left inside them for a reunion to reactivate. This is why people who reach out to avoidance after long periods of no contact are often met with a response that feels shockingly hollow. It's not that the avoidant is pretending not to care. It's that the internal machinery that used to produce caring for you has been powered down. They might feel a faint echo of something when they see your name. They might feel a moment of nostalgia. But that's all it is. An echo. A shadow. Not a living feeling. Not a longing. Not the ache you were hoping had been building in them all this time. And this is why the absence of push-pull is so devastating. Because as long as they were oscillating between wanting you and running from you, they were still emotionally alive to you. The moment that oscillation stops, so does the possibility of return. Here's what makes this even more painful to accept. The end of the push-pull often looks like peace. It looks like the avoidant is finally calm, finally consistent, finally not sending you those confusing signals that used to drive you crazy. And in your desperation for stability, you might mistake this new calm for growth. You might think they finally worked through something. You might think this is the moment things get easier between you. But the calm isn't growth. The calm is disengagement. The calm is what happens when the war ends because one side stopped fighting. And when an avoidant stops fighting the pull toward you, it means the pull itself has died. That's the moment you have to be brave enough to see clearly. Because once the push-pull is gone, no amount of waiting, hoping, or perfectly timed reappearance is going to bring it back to life. What's dead in an avoidance nervous system stays dead. And that quiet truth is the beginning of every real healing journey for anyone who has ever loved one. The rewriting of the story in their mind. What if the person you loved is no longer remembering your relationship the way you remember it, and every day that passes, the version of you in their mind is becoming someone you would barely recognize? This is one of the most quietly devastating aspects of avoidance psychology, and it's something almost no one prepares you for. Because when an avoidant crosses the threshold from temporary withdrawal into permanent detachment, something happens inside their mind that seals the door in a way distance and silence never could. They begin to rewrite the story, not consciously, not maliciously, not even intentionally in most cases, but steadily, quietly, and completely. And by the time the rewrite is finished, the relationship you shared no longer exists inside them the way it exists inside you. What lives inside them now is a carefully edited version designed to make sure they never look back. Human psychology has a term for this. It's called narrative reconstruction, and it's something all humans do to some degree when we process endings. We tell ourselves stories about what happened, why it happened, what it meant, and what it says about us. But for avoidance, this process is not gentle and reflective, it's protective and surgical. Their psyche cannot tolerate the vulnerability of admitting that they lost something beautiful, that they walked away from real love, that they had a hand in the ending of something that mattered. Because to admit that would mean feeling the full weight of grief, regret, and longing, and their entire attachment system was built to prevent them from ever feeling those things in an unmanaged way. So instead of grieving the relationship honestly, they rewrite it. And the rewrite always follows a pattern that is heartbreakingly predictable once you understand what to look for. The first thing that changes in their mental version of the story is you. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the qualities that used to make them fall for you get downgraded. Your warmth becomes neediness. Your depth becomes intensity. Your commitment becomes pressure. Your love becomes suffocation. This isn't happening because you actually were any of those things. It's happening because their mind needs a reason to justify the emotional exit that has already occurred inside them. And the easiest way to justify walking away from something valuable is to convince yourself it was never as valuable as it seemed. So the memories don't disappear, they get recolored. The moments they used to cherish get tagged with new emotional meaning. What used to feel like a beautiful night together starts to feel, in retrospect, like a moment where they should have seen a red flag. What used to feel like connection starts to feel, in memory, like enmeshment. The past isn't erased, it's edited. The second thing that changes is the relationship itself. In the avoidance rewritten story, the connection you shared was never quite right from the beginning. There was always something off. There was always a mismatch they somehow overlooked. They tell themselves they knew all along, deep down, that it wasn't going to work. They convinced themselves that the good times were exceptions and the difficult times were the truth. And here's the cruelest part of this process. The more time passes, the more real this rewritten story becomes to them. It's not that they're lying to themselves in any conscious way. It's that human memory is malleable, and each time they revisit a memory through the lens of the new narrative, that lens becomes a little more permanent. Within months, they genuinely believe the relationship was never what you both once knew it was, and once they believe it, no evidence from your side, no matter how loving or truthful, can dislodge that belief. The third and most final thing that changes is themselves in the story. In the rewritten version, they weren't the avoidant one. They weren't the one who withdrew, shut down, refused to be vulnerable, or made you feel small in your bigness. In their new story, they were the reasonable one, the one who tried, the one who tolerated, the one who eventually had no choice but to leave for their own well-being. This narrative isn't crafted out of cruelty. It's crafted out of psychological survival, because to admit their real role in what happened would be to confront the parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding. And their psyche will do almost anything to protect them from that confrontation, including rewriting reality itself. This is what psychology calls cognitive closure, and it is the true final chapter of an avoidant relationship. It's not the last conversation. It's not the last text. It's not even the moment they walked out the door. It's the moment inside their mind when the story of your relationship becomes fixed, sealed, and immune to revision. And here's what makes this so important for you to understand. Once cognitive closure has been reached, the avoidant is no longer in a psychological position to come back to you, not because they don't care about you as a person, not because they don't have fond memories somewhere buried underneath, but because coming back would require them to unravel the story they've spent months constructing to protect themselves. It would require them to admit the rewrite was wrong. It would require them to face the grief they successfully avoided. And their nervous system will fight that unraveling with every defense mechanism it has developed over a lifetime. This is why so many people who try to reach out to avoidance long after a breakup are met with a response that feels not just cold, but almost dismissive of the entire history they shared. It's not that the avoidant has forgotten you. It's that they've overwritten you. The person you were to them no longer lives in their memory in the same form. She's been edited into a shape that supports the story they need to believe. And here's the hardest truth of all. There is nothing you can do to force a rewrite of the rewrite. You cannot argue someone out of a narrative their psyche needs for survival. You cannot love them into remembering you accurately. You cannot prove to them that the story is wrong. The only person who can rewrite it back is them. And by the time cognitive closure has set in, they no longer have any motivation to do so. The story protects them. And they will hold on to that protection long after you stop trying to reach the person underneath it. The new attachment that locks the door, what happens inside an avoidant the moment they find someone or something that finally quiets the storm they used to feel around you. This is the question that keeps so many people awake at night after loving an avoidant. And the answer is one of the most misunderstood aspects of attachment psychology. Because when we hear the word replacement, we usually imagine a new romantic partner. We imagine them meeting someone else and falling in love. And yes, sometimes that's exactly what happens. But the truth is far more subtle, far more painful, and far more permanent than most people realize. Because for an avoidant, the thing that locks the door on you forever is rarely just another person. It's the discovery of any emotional arrangement that gives them the closeness they craved without the vulnerability they feared. And the moment they find that, whatever form it takes, the possibility of return quietly disappears. Attachment theory calls this emotional substitution, and it is one of the most powerful mechanisms in the human psyche. Every attachment we form fills a specific emotional role in our internal world. When that role is filled by someone new, whether that person is a romantic partner, a close friend, a mentor, a family member, or even a version of themselves they've never met before, the previous attachment loses its psychological gravity. And avoidants are especially vulnerable to this process because their bonds are always precariously balanced. They never fully commit to the depth of any single connection. They spread their emotional needs across multiple sources to avoid becoming dependent on any one person. So when a new source appears that promises the emotional benefits of connection without the terrifying demands of vulnerability, they move toward it almost automatically. And once they've moved, the space you used to occupy in their inner world closes in on itself, like a room sealed off after the tenant has left. The most surprising form of this substitution isn't a new romance. It's often a new relationship with themselves. Many avoidants, after a significant breakup, enter a phase of intense self-focus that looks from the outside like healthy healing, but is actually the deepest form of attachment retreat. They throw themselves into work. They discover new hobbies. They start going to the gym with a new intensity. They travel. They read. They rebuild their identity around a version of themselves that doesn't need anyone. And this new relationship with their own independence feels intoxicating to them because for the first time in a long time, they don't feel the emotional pull that used to disturb their sense of self. They feel free. They feel powerful. They feel whole. And that feeling, whether it's real healing or just sophisticated avoidance, becomes a new attachment in its own right. An attachment to the version of themselves that survived you. Here's what makes this so difficult to accept. When an avoidant falls in love with their own independence after leaving you, they don't experience your absence as loss. They experience it as liberation. And that reframing, that emotional relabeling, becomes the strongest lock on the door of return. Because to come back to you would mean giving up the identity they've built around not needing you. It would mean returning to the version of themselves that felt trapped, overwhelmed, and unsafe. And no matter how much they might miss certain moments with you, no matter how much they might occasionally soften at the memory of your laugh or your smell or the way you used to reach for their hand, they will not voluntarily walk back into the emotional territory they fought so hard to escape. Their new attachment to freedom is stronger than their fading attachment to you. Sometimes the substitution comes in the form of a rebound relationship, but not for the reasons most people assume. It's not that the avoidant has fallen madly in love with someone new. It's that they've found someone who requires less of them, someone who doesn't push for the depth of intimacy you did, someone who is themselves avoidant or emotionally distant, or simply not as attuned to the avoidant's inner world as you were. And this new person, imperfect as they might be, feels safer to the avoidance, precisely because they don't awaken the same intensity of feeling. In your relationship, they had to face the full weight of being loved. In this new one, they can coast at a comfortable emotional altitude, giving just enough to maintain the connection without ever risking the depths that terrified them with you. And once they've settled into that lower altitude, the last thing they want is to be pulled back into the atmosphere where the air was thinner and the emotional stakes were higher. There's a subtle cruelty in this that no one warns you about. The very qualities that made you deeply attractive to the avoidant in the beginning, your emotional depth, your capacity for real intimacy, your willingness to see them and be seen by them, become the exact reasons they cannot come back to you once they've found something less demanding. You didn't lose because you were too little. You lost because you were too much of what they couldn't handle. And their new attachment isn't superior to what you offered. It's simply safer. Safer isn't better. Safer is just what a wounded nervous system chooses when it hasn't done the work to become brave. But safer wins, over and over again, in the internal calculus of an unhealed avoidant. This is where you have to sit with a truth that will change the way you interpret their silence forever. If an avoidant has genuinely formed a new attachment, whether to a person, an identity, a lifestyle, or a version of themselves that doesn't need what you offered, they are not coming back to reconsider. They are not sitting in the quiet, missing you, waiting for the right moment. They are actively invested in maintaining the emotional arrangement that has given them relief from the anxiety your love once stirred in them. And every day that passes, that new arrangement becomes more entrenched, more woven into their sense of self, more indistinguishable from who they believe they are now. The door hasn't just closed. It has been walled over with something new. And the tragedy is that you can spend years reaching for a door that no longer exists, in a wall that has become the entire foundation of the life they've built without you. The indifference that runs deeper than anger. Have you ever tried desperately to get a reaction out of someone who used to feel everything with you, only to be met with a stillness so complete that it made you question whether the relationship ever really happened at all? That stillness has a name in attachment psychology, and it is the single most final signal an avoidant can send. Not anger, not silence, not even coldness. Indifference. True, deep, unbothered indifference. And the reason it hits so much harder than any of those other reactions is that anger, silence, and coldness all still contain something. They contain heat. They contain charge. They contain the residue of a feeling that hasn't fully dissolved. But indifference contains nothing at all. And nothing, in the language of the human heart, is the loudest word ever spoken. When people talk about signs an ex has moved on, they usually focus on the wrong markers. They watch for whether the ex is dating someone new. They analyze how quickly the ex replies to messages. They look for signs of jealousy, bitterness, or resentment. But none of those are the true indicators, because all of those feelings, uncomfortable as they are, still require the ex to be emotionally engaged with the memory of you. Bitterness is engagement. Jealousy is engagement. Resentment is engagement. Even hatred, as painful as it sounds, is engagement. As long as an avoidant is still feeling something charged about you, there is still emotional current running between the two of you. And current, however painful, can still be redirected. Indifference, on the other hand, is the sign that the current has been cut at the source. To understand why indifference is the most final signal, you have to understand what it takes for a human being to reach it. Genuine indifference towards someone who was once deeply loved is not a natural state. It's not something the human heart drifts into casually. It's a state that has to be earned through months, sometimes years, of active emotional processing. For a secure person, reaching indifference requires grieving, integrating, and gradually releasing the emotional charge of the connection. For an avoidant, the path is different, but the destination is even more complete because avoidants don't just release the charge, they dismantle the entire emotional architecture that held the charge in the first place. And once that architecture is gone, the person who used to live inside it doesn't exist to them in any charged way. You are no longer someone they've moved on from. You are someone they've moved past, which is a different psychological state entirely. Here's the part that most people cannot bring themselves to accept. When an avoidant has reached genuine indifference toward you, they don't feel anything when they hear your name. Not a pang, not a jolt, not even the faint discomfort that comes from remembering someone you once cared about and then hurt. Just a flat, mild recognition. The same way you might feel about someone you sat next to on a plane once. And this isn't performance. This isn't them pretending not to care to protect their ego. This is the actual endpoint of the emotional deactivation process. Their nervous system has been running since the first moment they started to withdraw from you. Their body has completed the biochemical work of unbinding from you. Their brain has completed the neural work of dissolving the pathways that used to connect to your presence, and what's left is a quiet emotional flatline where the storm used to be. This is why so many people mistake indifference for healing when it appears in their own healing journey. They think, I don't feel anything anymore, so I must be over it. But there's an important distinction between healed indifference and avoidant indifference. Healed indifference comes after you've fully felt everything the loss had to teach you. It arrives at the end of grief, not as an escape from it. Avoidant indifference comes as a way to skip the feeling entirely. It arrives not through processing, but through suppression, deactivation, and emotional numbing. From the outside, the two can look similar. From the inside, they are worlds apart. And when you're on the receiving end of an avoidance indifference, what you're actually witnessing is the successful outcome of years of psychological conditioning that taught their nervous system how to unfeel someone on command. There's a specific behavior that reveals when an avoidant has crossed into this final stage, and it's one of the most subtle but telling signs in all of attachment psychology. When they see you, hear about you, or think about you, they don't avoid the moment. They don't tense up. They don't change the subject. They engage with the topic of you the same way they would engage with the topic of the weather. There's no charge, no effort to appear unbothered, no performative disinterest. They are simply genuinely unbothered. And this ease around your existence, this smooth calm in the presence of what used to move them, is the clearest indication that whatever was between you has been fully processed and filed away in the deepest archives of their mind. What makes this stage so painful for the person still holding on is that indifference cannot be reached, it cannot be provoked, it cannot be shaken. You could reappear in their life tomorrow, transformed, radiant, everything they ever said they wanted, and the emotional response would be the same, mild, measured, distant, because the person who could have been moved by your transformation no longer lives inside them. That version of them was retired the moment their nervous system decided that feeling nothing was safer than feeling too much. And once safety becomes the primary emotional currency of someone's inner world, The vulnerability required to feel deeply for you again becomes something they will not spend, no matter how much you offer them in return. This is the moment when you have to make a choice that will define the rest of your emotional life. You can keep trying to find a crack in the flat line, a small opening where a feeling might slip through, a moment of vulnerability that might rekindle what was lost. Or you can accept that indifference isn't a phase you can wait out. It's not a wall you can climb over. It's not a mask you can pull off. It's the sound of a relationship that has been fully, quietly, permanently laid to rest inside another human being. And once you accept that, something powerful becomes available to you for the first time. The freedom to stop reaching for someone who is no longer reaching back, and to turn the full force of your love, your depth, your capacity for connection toward the one person who has been waiting for it all along. Yourself. What this means for you and your healing. What would it feel like to finally stop waiting for someone who was never going to walk back through your door, and to realize that the person you were becoming while you waited is actually the person you are always meant to be? This is the quiet revelation waiting on the other side of every avoidant relationship. And it is the hardest, most beautiful, most transformative truth you may ever have to face. Because up until this point, everything we've explored has been about them, their psychology, their patterns, their silent goodbyes and rewritten stories, their indifference and their locked doors. But the reason any of this matters, the reason you've stayed with these words for this long, isn't really about them at all. It's about you. It's about the version of you that has been slowly fading while you gave your energy to someone who could not receive it. And it's about the version of you that is ready to come back to life the moment you stop trying to resurrect what was never yours to save. There's a specific kind of grief that comes with loving an avoidant, and it doesn't get talked about enough. It's not the grief of a clean breakup. It's not the grief of betrayal or dramatic loss. It's the grief of ambiguity, the grief of never quite knowing when it ended, or if it ended, or whether it might still not be over. It's the grief of loving someone who left before they left, and continued leaving even while they were still present. And this ambiguous grief has a way of trapping people in a psychological limbo that can last for years if it isn't consciously interrupted. Because as long as there's a small door open somewhere in your mind, a small maybe, a small what if, your heart will keep pouring itself into that opening, hoping that this time the love will finally reach them. And every drop you pour into that door is a drop you're not pouring into your own life. The most important psychological shift you can make right now is not about hating them, not about hardening your heart, not about pretending you don't still care. It's about redirecting the enormous emotional resources you've been sending outward and finally aiming them inward. Because here's what most people don't realize about the aftermath of loving an avoidant. The intensity of your longing for them was never really about them. It was about the parts of yourself you learned to abandon in order to keep the connection alive. Every time you shrank yourself to make them comfortable, every time you swallowed a need to avoid triggering their withdrawal, every time you accepted crumbs and told yourself it was a feast, you were slowly moving further from your own center. And what feels like missing them is often, at its deepest level, missing the version of yourself that existed before you learned to disappear for someone else's comfort. Coming back to that self is the real work of healing, and it doesn't happen through waiting. It doesn't happen through analyzing their behavior for the 1000th time. It doesn't happen through crafting the perfect message they'll never respond to the way you're hoping. It happens through the slow, unglamorous, deeply courageous practice of remembering who you were before you contorted yourself into their emotional shape. It happens through paying attention to the small things you stopped enjoying because they didn't, through rediscovering the friendships you let fade because the relationship consumed you, through allowing yourself to want things again, big things, loud things, inconvenient things, without checking first whether wanting them makes you too much. Attachment psychology offers something profoundly hopeful in the middle of all this pain, and it's this. The attachment style you were shaped with is not the attachment style you have to die with. Human beings are capable of developing what researchers call earned secure attachment, and this happens not through finding a new perfect partner, but through the deep internal work of becoming a safe presence for yourself. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you're building it. Every time you sit with a difficult emotion, instead of running from it, you're building it. Every time you refuse to abandon yourself just to feel connected to someone who cannot show up for you, you're building it. And slowly, quietly, without any external validation, you become the very thing you were desperately seeking in them. Consistent, present, unwilling to disappear. There's a truth that lives on the other side of loving and avoidant, and it's a truth you can only understand once you've stopped waiting for them. The absence of their return is not a punishment. It is a redirection. The universe is not being cruel to you by keeping them away. It is protecting the future version of you that could not exist if they came back. Because if they walked through your door tomorrow, all of the growth, all of the strength, all of the sacred rebuilding you've done in their absence would collapse back into the old dynamic. You would shrink again. You would swallow again. You would abandon the person you've become to make space for the person they've always been. And somewhere deep inside you, past the longing, past the ache, you already know this. You already know that their return would cost you the very self you've been fighting so hard to reclaim. So let this be the moment you stop asking whether they're coming back and start asking a different question entirely. Who am I becoming in the space they left behind? What am I discovering about myself that could never have been discovered while I was managing their emotional distance? What kind of love? What kind of depth? What kind of unshakable presence am I capable of offering to someone who is actually available to receive it? Because that is the person waiting for you on the other side of this grief. Not another avoidant, not another lesson, not another cycle. Someone whose nervous system can meet yours in the depth you were always meant to swim in, and you will not be able to recognize them, let alone hold on to them, until you have first learned to recognize and hold on to yourself, the final revelation of every avoidant relationship, the one that only reveals itself once you've stopped chasing the person who left, is that you were never really trying to win them back. You were trying to win yourself back. You were trying to prove that you were worthy of the love you gave them. You were trying to close the wound that told you love had to be earned through self-sacrifice. And the extraordinary truth is that closing that wound was never something they could have done for you. It was only ever going to be done by you, in the quiet, in the aftermath, in the space that only their absence could create. Their leaving, painful as it was the doorway to the most important relationship of your life. The one that will finally, never leave. The one you've been building this whole time without even knowing it. The one with the person you're becoming right now. As these words settle into you and something inside you begins, at last, to remember who you were always meant to be.